Alien medics baffled as Deathworlder pauses heartbeat to repair critical injury. In the dimly lit medical bay of the Galarian cruiser Nebula's Grace, a scene unfolded that none of the alien medics had ever witnessed before. They were accustomed to treating myriad species across the galaxy, each with their unique biologies and vulnerabilities, but nothing prepared them for the sight of a human, one of the fabled Deathworlders, lying on the operating table, his body riddled with wounds from a brutal encounter with a ferocious alien predator. As the lead medic, a tall, blue-skinned Galarian named Threx, studied the human's condition, he felt a mix of awe and confusion. The readings on his monitor were unlike anything he'd seen. The human's heart rate, normally a constant rhythm, had dropped to an almost imperceptible thrum, pausing at intervals that seemed impossible for a living creature. The Galarian medics exchanged glances, their antennae twitching in disbelief. "What is he doing?" one whispered, an edge of concern creeping into his voice. "He should be dead." Threx leaned closer, analyzing the human's injuries. The flesh around a deep gash on the human side was seeping crimson, yet instead of panicking, the human appeared calm. His breathing was shallow, and he focused intently on the wound, almost as if he were conversing with it. Threx had heard stories of Deathworlders' extraordinary resilience, but this was beyond comprehension. "Prepare the bio-repair unit," Threx commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos brewing in his mind. "We must stabilize him before he succumbs to shock." The other medics scrambled to obey, but Threx's attention remained locked on the human. He marveled at how the Deathworlder seemed to exert a strange influence over his own body, controlling processes that should be involuntary. It was as if he were pulling his heartbeat back, suspending time to give himself a moment to mend. Why would he pause his heartbeat? Another medic pondered, incredulity coloring his tone. "It goes against all known biological protocols." Threx could not answer. He had read about the remarkable endurance of humans, their ability to thrive in environments that would obliterate most species. Yet, witnessing this phenomenon firsthand was a different matter entirely. With each passing second, the human's body grew weaker, but his determination burned brightly, an indomitable spirit that resonated through the room. As the medics worked frantically to stabilize the patient, Threx's mind raced. Could this human possess abilities that allowed him to transcend the very limits of life and death? The thought both fascinated and terrified him. Just then, a low rumble echoed through the cruiser. Alarms blared, signaling a new crisis. The Galarian ship was under attack. The crew was forced to divert their attention, but Threx remained fixated on the human. Amid the chaos, he couldn't shake the feeling that this Deathworlder held secrets far beyond their understanding, secrets that could change the course of their mission and perhaps the fate of the galaxy itself. As the medics fought to save their patient, the human began to shift slightly on the table, a glimmer of fierce determination in his eyes. He was ready to defy the odds once more. Little did they know, this was just the beginning of a remarkable journey that would bridge the divide between their worlds. As the alarms echoed through the ship, the Galarian medics struggled to keep their focus. Threx, however, refused to leave the human's side. The battle outside could wait. This moment was unprecedented, a rare glimpse into the depths of Deathworlder biology. Every instinct told him that this human was more than just a patient. He was something extraordinary. The human, now barely conscious, let out a strained breath. His heartbeat slowed to a crawl, yet his body did not collapse into death. Instead, his muscles twitched, veins constricting, as though his body was forcing all of its remaining energy into repairing itself. It was terrifying, unnatural, and yet mesmerizing. Threx glanced at the medical monitor once more. The human's heart was pausing at regular intervals, a dangerous tactic in any species. If the heart didn't pump, oxygen wouldn't circulate. But here, in front of him, this Deathworlder seemed to be manipulating his own body as if it were a machine he could control at will. The medics surrounding Threx were whispering again, their disbelief growing by the second. "Chief Medic," one of them said, breaking through Threx's daze, "the bio-repair unit is ready. We need to act now." Threx nodded sharply, pulling his focus away from the human's strange ability. "Initiate the sequence. Stabilize the vitals as best you can." As the bio-repair unit hummed to life, a beam of pale light scanned the human's body, seeking out the damaged tissue. Tiny nanobots flowed into the open wounds, working to close the gashes and stimulate rapid healing. It was a technology the Galarian medics had perfected over decades, yet Threx was unsure if even their advanced systems could match the human's bizarre form of self-healing. "Vitals are still unstable," one medic reported, his voice tense. "He's losing too much blood." Just as Threx was about to order further intervention, the human's eyes snapped open. His hand shot up, grabbing Threx's arm with surprising strength. The entire room froze. What are you doing?" Threx stammered, startled by the sudden movement. The human's lips twitched into a faint smile. "I need just a moment longer." Threx stared in disbelief. "You're in critical condition. You'll die if..." "I won't," the human cut him off, his voice hoarse but resolute. "I know what I'm doing. Just pause the treatment. Let me focus." Threx hesitated. This went against every medical protocol he had ever learned. But there was something in the human's eyes, a determination that was impossible to ignore. Slowly, reluctantly, Threx signaled the medics to pause the bio-repair unit. The nanobots stopped their work, and the medics stepped back, exchanging nervous glances. The room fell silent. All eyes were on the human as he closed his eyes again, taking shallow breaths. Threx could see it now, the subtle control the human had over his body, regulating his systems with an eerie precision. His heartbeat slowed even further, so much that the monitors barely registered a pulse. For a moment, Threx thought the human had gone too far, that he had pushed his body beyond its limits. Then, something remarkable happened. The human's blood, which had been flowing freely from the gashes, began to clot on its own. Muscle fibers twitched and tightened, skin knitting itself together as if responding to an internal command. The medics watched in stunned silence as the human's body slowly began to stabilize, not through their advanced technology, but through sheer force of will. Threx felt a shiver run down his spine. No species in the galaxy had ever demonstrated this kind of control over their own biology. It was as if the human was defying nature itself, rewriting the rules of life and death with nothing but his mind. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the human's eyes fluttered open again. His breathing steadied, his heartbeat slowly returning to a more normal rhythm. He looked up at Threx, the faint smile still playing on his lips. "Now you can finish the job," he rasped, nodding toward the bio-repair unit. Threx could barely find the words. How did you do that?" The human chuckled weakly, though it cost him some effort. "We're Deathworlders, remember? Surviving is kind of our thing." Threx stood there, speechless. The Galarian medics, normally so composed and confident in their knowledge, were left in awe. They had spent years mastering the art of healing, but this human had shown them something they never thought possible, a level of resilience and control that transcended anything they had ever encountered. As the bio-repair unit resumed its work, patching up the final remnants of the human's injuries, Threx couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter had only scratched the surface of what humans were capable of. There was something terrifyingly powerful about these Deathworlders, something that made them more than just another species in the galaxy. And for the first time, Threx wondered if they had only begun to understand the true nature of humanity. As the bio-repair unit finished its task, sealing the last of the human's wounds, the room remained eerily quiet. The Galarian medics, still processing what they had witnessed, exchanged uneasy glances. Their years of training had taught them to trust in the finest medical technology in the galaxy. But this human, this Deathworlder, had proven that there were forces at play beyond even their comprehension. Threx, the lead medic, stood rooted to the spot. His mind raced with questions, but none seemed adequate for the moment. He had always prided himself on understanding every species under his care, knowing their weaknesses, strengths, and limits, but the human lying before him had shattered those notions entirely. What sort of creature could control their heartbeat, force their body to heal, and stave off death through sheer determination? The human, still weak but alive, sat up slowly on the medical table. His hand brushed across the now smooth skin where deep wounds had once been, and he let out a slow, relieved sigh. He turned to Threx with a faint grin, his eyes still burning with that unyielding spark of life. "Thanks," he said simply, as if what had just occurred was nothing more than routine. "You did good work." Threx blinked, struggling to find his voice. You shouldn't even be alive." The human shrugged as if the thought was of no consequence. "We're tough. It's just something we've learned, growing up on a planet like ours." "Deathworlders," Threx muttered. more to himself than anyone else. I've heard the stories, but this? The human chuckled, though the sound was hoarse, and clearly his body hadn't fully recovered. Stories never quite capture the reality, do they? He swung his legs off the table, standing up shakily. There's a reason we survive. Earth taught us one thing: when death knocks, you knock back harder. Threx could only stare in wonder. He had seen species who thrived in extreme environments, races that evolved to live in conditions that would kill others in an instant. But humans were something else entirely. They didn't just survive the harsh conditions of their homeworld, they embraced it, mastered it, and, as he had just seen, they had learned to manipulate their own biology in ways that bordered on the miraculous. The ship's alarms continued to blare, but the Galarian medics found themselves glued to the human, unable to tear their eyes away from this living paradox. Finally, Threx managed to pull himself together enough to speak. You paused your heartbeat. Why? How did you know that would work? The human's grin widened, though it was clear he was still exhausted from the ordeal. Desperate times, right? There's a trick some of us learn: if you slow your heart enough, just to the edge of stopping, you can minimize the damage. Blood loss slows down, the body goes into a kind of emergency stasis. It's risky, but when the alternative is death, you take your chances. That's... Threx's words failed him. The sheer audacity of such a method, and the calm confidence with which the human had executed it, left him in awe. That's beyond reckless. Yeah, well, the human said, leaning against the table to steady himself. We don't exactly play by the same rules as the rest of the galaxy, do we? Threx couldn't argue with that. He looked at the human, still battered but standing on his own 2 feet, and realized that the galaxy would never be the same after humans had entered it. These Deathworlders, with their strange mix of resilience and unpredictability, were unlike anything the galaxy had ever known. Suddenly, a voice crackled over the intercom, cutting through the tension in the medical bay. Galarian cruiser Nebula's Grace, this is Captain Aaron of the human fleet. We've arrived to assist. Prepare for extraction. The human pushed himself off the table, his strength returning, though he still moved with caution. Looks like my ride's here, he said, giving Threx a nod. Guess this is goodbye. Document. Threx watched as the human limped toward the exit, his heart still racing with questions he knew would never be fully answered. Wait, Threx called out, stopping the human in his tracks. What's your name? The human paused, turning slightly, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Derek, he said, the name rolling off his tongue with an air of finality. Derek Kincaid. With that, he stepped through the doors, leaving the Galarian medics behind, still reeling from the encounter. Threx stood there, staring at the empty space where Derek had been just moments ago, trying to process the enormity of what had just happened. The galaxy was vast, filled with countless wonders and dangers, but nothing had prepared him for the sheer willpower of a human. As the medical bay fell silent once more, Threx felt a strange sense of anticipation. Humans, with their ability to defy the odds, were going to change everything, and while the galaxy had yet to realize it, Threx knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning. As Derek Kincaid disappeared through the medical bay doors, Threx found himself standing there, deep in thought. The weight of what he had just witnessed settled heavily in his mind. He had encountered countless species in his years as a medic, but none had shown such mastery over their own physiology, such raw determination to survive. Humans were truly different. Chief Medic Threx, we need you on the bridge. A voice crackled through his personal comm device, snapping him back to reality. Threx hesitated for a moment, glancing one last time at the now empty medical table where the Deathworlder had defied the impossible. With a final sigh, he adjusted his medical coat and left the bay, heading for the bridge. Meanwhile, Derek made his way through the bustling corridors of the Nebula's Grace, his body still aching from the ordeal, though his steps were firmer now. Galarian crew members hurried past him, too preoccupied with the battle situation to pay much attention to the human who had just cheated death. He could feel the tension in the air. Something big was happening outside. As he reached the docking bay, he saw the sleek form of a human dropship landing on the Galarian cruiser's platform. The rear hatch opened, and Derek's comrades poured out, weapons drawn and eyes scanning for threats. A familiar voice called out from the front of the squad, "Kincaid, what in the hell happened to you?" Derek grinned as he saw his team leader, Captain Aaron, striding toward him with a mix of relief and irritation. "Took a little detour," Derek replied, his voice still hoarse. Had a run-in with some local wildlife. Aaron raised an eyebrow, his gaze flicking to Derek's bandaged wounds. Detour. Ha, you look like you just wrestled with a razor beast and came out on the losing end. Something like that, Derek chuckled, but I got the job done. Aaron shook his head, a smirk tugging at his lips. You Deathworlders are all the same. Can't tell if you're fearless or just crazy. Probably both. Derek shot back, still grinning despite the pain. What's the situation? Aaron's face turned serious. We've got an enemy fleet approaching fast. They outnumber us 5-1, and their tech's not something we've seen before. We need to get you out of here before things get worse. Derek's expression hardened. And what about the Galarians? Are they just going to be left behind? We're coordinating with their command, Aaron explained. They've got evacuation protocols in place, but it's not going to be pretty if the enemy breaks through. Derek glanced back toward the corridors of the cruiser, thinking about the Galarian medics who had just saved his life. Despite their fear and confusion about his abilities, they had done their job, trusting in their knowledge and their technology. He couldn't just leave them to face annihilation alone. All right, Derek said, nodding. Let's get moving, but if things go south, we make sure they get out too. Aaron clapped him on the shoulder. We'll do what we can. Now come on, time to get off this boat before it turns into a scrap heap. Back on the bridge of the Nebula's Grace, Threx arrived to find the Galarian officers in a state of barely controlled panic. The viewscreen displayed the approaching enemy fleet, massive ships of unknown origin, bristling with weaponry that made the Galarian cruiser look like a child's toy in comparison. Chief Medic, the captain, a stern-faced Galarian named Rivik, called out, "You should return to the medical bay. Things are about to get difficult." Threx glanced at the screen, his stomach churning at the sight of the enemy ships looming closer. But before he could respond, one of the tactical officers shouted, "Incoming transmission from the enemy fleet." "Put it through," Rivik ordered, his voice tight with tension. The viewscreen flickered, and the image of a towering alien figure appeared. Its skin was dark and segmented, its eyes glowing with a predatory light. The alien spoke in a deep, guttural language that the Galarian translators struggled to keep up with. "You are in violation of our territory," the alien commander snarled. "Surrender your ship and all its contents, or be destroyed." Rivik stood tall, his expression firm despite the clear threat. "We are on a peaceful mission and mean no harm to your people. There is no need for violence." The alien commander let out a low, menacing laugh. "Peaceful? You bring Deathworlders into our domain and speak of peace? There is no peace with your kind, only annihilation." Threx's heart skipped a beat. The alien commander knew about the humans aboard, and if their hatred was that deep, there would be no negotiations, no escape. Before Rivik could respond, another voice cut through the transmission, a voice Threx immediately recognized. "This is Captain Aaron of the human fleet," the voice said, calm but with an underlying edge. "You're making a mistake. Stand down, and no one has to die today." The alien commander sneered. "Deathworlders, always so eager for blood. You think we fear you? Your kind is nothing but chaos and destruction." Derek Kincaid stepped forward, now standing beside Captain Aaron, his eyes locked on the screen, a fire burning within them. "You don't know anything about us," Derek said coldly, "but you're about to find out." The transmission ended abruptly, and the bridge fell silent. Rivik looked over at Threx, uncertainty etched on his face. "What do we do now?" Threx had no answer. All he could think about was the humans standing at the front of the battle, ready to face down an enemy that had every advantage. But something in Derek's voice, that quiet, unshakable resolve, filled Threx with a strange sense of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, these Deathworlders were more than just survivors. Perhaps they were the galaxy's best chance against the darkness that threatened to consume them all. The battle that followed would be spoken of for generations, an epic clash where the few stood against the many, and in the heart of it all, the Deathworlders fought with a ferocity and courage that left even their enemies in awe. But that is another story, for another day. The legend of Derek Kincaid, the human who paused his own heartbeat to survive, would spread across the stars, a testament to the indomitable spirit of a species born from the most dangerous world in the galaxy. And for the first time in galactic history, the universe began to understand what it truly meant to be human.